My name is Frank Mercer. I turned 72 this spring. I live on the south side of St. Helens, a clapboard place with an amber porch light that leaks a cone across the steps, a refrigerator that hums in the night, and a wall clock that ticks the honest seconds while I try to sleep. I was a deputy in search and rescue for most of my life. The things I'm about to tell you happened between late 2004 and the winter of 2005. I'm telling them now because I've carried them around like a stone in my shoe for 20 years, and the stone has grown heavy. If you'll stay with me, please do it quietly. I'm asking you to listen as if you're sitting on my porch, cup of coffee cooling in your hands. There are loud headlines that have been written about this country for years. Big words, bigger claims. I'm not here to sell you a headline. I want to tell you what I saw, what we found, and why I chose to keep something back. We took the first call in November. Marble Mountain Snow Park, late-season hikers overdue. A woman's name, Tyler Green, was on the report. She'd been expected back by a worried sister. A GPS pinged out a faint trailhead signal that only added prickly hope and no real comfort. Sheriff Daniels called me in because I was the one who knew those ridges, the switchbacks before Ape Canyon, the old logging roads that disappear into alder and driftwood. Sanchez, Laramie, and Sam rode with me to the staging area. We set up the usual, a base tarp, a pot of coffee that kept tasting like metal, radios on a channel that hissed with other people's anxieties. The town, Cougar and Stevenson, talked in half-jokes about Sasquatch. Folks there like their tall stories. Earl, who ran the feed store, kept telling me over the counter that what I needed was to whistle back at the woods and see who came out. That kind of talk has a way of softening grief into gossip. But when families show up at the sheriff's office with a picture and a sweater someone forgot at a trailhead, the humor evaporates. It becomes lists of gear and dates and the slow rotation of hope. We worked by the book, which is mostly patience and repetition. We ran line searches along contour, calling names into fog and alder, feeling the map more than reading it. We moved packs, we marked cairns, we left flags. On the third day, we found a woven basket hanging on a nail of a dead alder just off the trail into Marble South Drain. It was old, its fibers dark with damp. Someone had hung it like a coat, and inside were little things: a pair of gloves, a dented stainless spoon, a folded chevron of cloth that smelled faintly of cedar and human sweat. Small, domestic things that meant someone had been there and thought of home. That basket became a hinge. It was the first time I felt like the place itself was answering us, not men or reporters. I remember the smell, river mud, and something that never sat quite right with me, like wet fur and wool knit by hands that had been out in the rain. Sanchez knelt and touched the rim, his gloved fingers finding two small notches. "Intentional," he said, but said it low. Laramie stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and tried laughter. Sam took a photograph and cursed at his camera's weak light. The radio at base crackled with a family member asking if we'd found anything, the word like an offering. We found the first pair of prints that afternoon, half buried in slush near a runoff. They were not human. They weren't the cartoonish outlines you see on postcards. These had length and a weight to them, an imprint that suggested a large, splayed foot with an odd, blunt toe alignment. I placed my gloved hand to the side of one and thought, not for the first time, of how small a human hand looks next to certain wilderness shapes. "Wider than my hand by half again," I told the others. "Longer, too." Sanchez ran his fingers along the edge. "Animal?" he asked. We argued because argument keeps you from admitting fear. Sheriff Daniels wanted explanation. He wanted a rational taxonomy that fit bureaucratic boxes. We kept taking measurements and estimates, 3 to 4 times a man's shoe, roughly, and we kept the pictures U.S. Forest Service protocol would allow: evidence photos, scale sticks, no sensational angles. At night, the town's talk grew teeth. Some reporter in Stevenson wrote a piece with a headline I still find sour: "Bigfoot and missing hikers, the kind of words that sow panic into curiosity." I don't deny the word sells. I do deny that it ever really explained what we were facing. Those headlines drew more people to the ridge, people with flashlights, people with pitying faces, and, sometimes, people who wanted to prove a legend. That made the work harder. Families came and wanted answers with both hands. "Don't let them become a number," one mother told me, bearing the problem plain. I wanted the same. The motifs started to stack in my head like cairns. The porch light of my life, simple domestic things, became a counterweight to the forest's other signals. In the cabin where I slept between shifts, the refrigerator hummed in the dark like a small, distant engine of order. The wall clock ticked. I learned to listen for the difference between the ticks. Sometimes I would wake and hear 3 taps on the doorframe of the wall, 3 knocks, soft, measured, like knuckles on wood. At first, I blamed the house settling. Later, I stopped offering explanations. There are rules in search and rescue about evidence. You catalog it, you report it, you file it. But there's a different set of rules that life, outside of forms, teaches you. One is about the faces of families. Another is about the wild and how it will sometimes return what you leave out there in a way that feels like intention. You learn not to take the wilderness personally until you have to. One evening, after a long shift, Earl brought me coffee and a sandwich to the staging tarp. He'd been in and out of the county for 40 years and had a way of making light go brittle around the edges. "They're saying 1,000, he muttered, steadier with coffee than I was. 1,000, Frank. Can you imagine?" He grinned in a way that said he couldn't. "Makes you wonder what's been under that dirt for 50 years, eh?" 1,000, I said aloud, because the number sounded like a weapon. The town had a way of exaggerating everything into mythology, sometimes to protect themselves from the bare, smaller tragedies. 100 missing hikers listed in state files could be turned into 1,000 by careless hands. I knew that. Yet later, when I walked the ridges alone, the scale of what had been gathered in that ravine felt like a number that would never be neat. We followed leads. We found another basket moved from the nail to the base of a tree. Stacked stones, little towers, began to appear in places that made no trail sense. At the mouth of a drainage, by rubbled cliffs, near a creek where the water made a broken, steady music. They were deliberate. Not random cairns of hikers larking a route, but small, precise piles of flat stones, as if someone had been assembling keepsakes. The way they were built made me think of children on a beach, careful with the grief that needs fingers. One morning, Laramie came back to base white-faced. "You have to see this," he said. He led us down a gully, and there, half buried in duff and cedar, were packs, dozens of them, stacked like cordwood along a dry bench. No bodies, no blood, just loaded packs and a few pairs of boot liners folded inside, and the melt-stiffened ropes threaded through straps like someone had tried to keep them neat. The sight stopped my breath in my throat the way a slap will, that abrupt. Sam took photographs. I kept my hands in my pockets and tried to think in inventory. Names started to unfold in my mind like a register. Tyler Green, the woman we'd been looking for, 2 brothers who'd gone off trail in a February whiteout, a woman with an old GPS who'd been reported missing in April. Family faces came with every pack in the stacked bench, an uninvited imagination. I felt like I was standing in somebody's archive of absence. I do not, in that memory, recall a single person saying "monster" out loud in a way that stuck. We said curated more, collected more. The words did nothing to warm the cold. We followed prints from that bench down to a ravine that maps don't like to name. I won't print its coordinates here. That was one of the first rules I learned about telling any of this. Never give a map to gullible hands. The prints led to the mouth of a cleft in basalt where the light fell wrong. Inside, the smell was thicker. Wet fur and old rain and something faintly metallic. Not blood, but the tang of old gear. The pack stacks sat there in tiers, like rows of chairs left empty. I remember the silence there, not even the small chirp of a lone bird. It felt like the whole canyon had been holding its breath. It was that night that changed the ledger in me. I'd gone back alone because solitude sharpens what company relaxes. I told myself I was making sure we hadn't missed any human sign. Maybe I was lying to myself and wanted to look into the face of whatever had done this. The air bit at my cheekbones. The river's edge tinked. My flashlight picked out the outline of a large thing in the willows, a silhouette that, arranged against the stars, had the quiet geometry of a creature used to standing tall. I remember how small my radio sounded, another human layer between me and that shape. "Frank?" Sanchez's voice crackled in through the static. I said, "I'm fine, I'm just checking," which, in SAR parlance, meant I'd gone where I shouldn't alone. He said nothing more because he knew me. He knew the kind of man who checks. It didn't roar, it didn't charge. It watched, and it made a sound, a whoop that hung there, not loud but full of a shape like a question. That whoop, if it was a whoop, did more to arrange the night than any flashlight. It had a rhythm that echoed, and then there were the knocks, three deliberate taps on a flat stone near the bench, not on wood, on stone. They came from my left and seemed to be placed in the world like punctuation. I stood very still. My hands remembered how to hold a gun, but my heart had learned to fold its countenance into other things. The thing moved with a grace that suggested long limbs and an economy of action. Then, almost gently, it stepped aside a fern and pointed, not at me in a threatening way, but to the rows of packs. The motion was like a compass settling on north. It was a communication more than a threat. Look. I have a bad habit of telling myself rational things to keep fear from being louder. Animal reaction, I told myself. An ape-like bear, maybe. But that did not fit with the other evidence. The baskets had been hung with care, the stones stacked, the packs folded. There was a patience in the arrangement that didn't belong to a typical animal tending a den or dragging in prey. There was an order, a selection. Someone or something had been taking care. I reached for my camera with the slow care of a man who has lived long enough to know that hasty hands make bad proofs. I filmed for a few minutes, hands trembling, the camera steady by luck or habit. You can hear my breath in the recording. You can hear the refrigerator hum, as if the world had closed around that small domestic memory. The creature, that is the word everyone wants, did not make sudden moves. It kept pointing, and then it made a sound like a soft, wet exhale, and turned. Then whooped again, and with the tip of a long finger, it traced the edge of one of the packs. It tapped the stone twice, then 3 knocks on the bench, like a sequence. It made the stone stack, then turned its head toward me and held my gaze in a way that felt like an invitation and a question. It was showing me something. It wanted me to see. This is where many people, especially on the internet, will say I was given proof of 1,000 dead, or 1,000 abducted, or some apocalyptic tally. They will fit the pieces into a narrative that floods into numbers. I will not do that. In the footage I have, and the footage is real, yes, I saw no dead bodies. I saw an accumulation of what the forest yields and what people leave. Packs, boots, tents, personal gear, carefully placed. The creature's gestures suggested a collector, a caretaker, not a slayer. The collection read to me more like a museum than a graveyard. After that night, I kept the recording on a hard drive I never showed. We gathered whatever the family members could verify, identifying marks on a scarf, a ripped patch of a rain jacket, a lighter with a name. Families came, they cried, we logged the items. It felt wrong to parade the stacks like trophies. It felt wrong to close them up as evidence and let them sit on a drawed shelf in a courthouse while the families went home with nothing but lists. I was torn between the obligations of an officer, report everything, and the obligations of a man, which are more crooked and changeable. Sheriff Daniels pushed for a press release. He wanted to frame the discovery, to make statements that would calm the town and open channels for relatives to come claim their things. Laramie wanted to post the pictures in a closed group to see if anyone could identify certain gear. Sanchez thought we should put the whole thing under the state's missing persons unit and let the bureaucrats do whatever they do. I had a different thought, one that made my palms sweat. What happens if you make the collection public and people show up to the ravine to take photos, to mock, to hike into a place that does not want them? What happens if someone goes there and leaves a wrapper, a cigarette, a scent? What happens if the thing that had been arranging those packs decides to arrange people's visits the way it arranged the packs? We did what you do most of the time in small towns. We chose the least hurtful option we could craft. We cataloged and logged. We put up signs that told casual hikers to beware of hazardous terrain and to respect closures. We told the families we'd keep their items safe at the sheriff's office. We did not release the footage. I kept the drive. People will say that secrecy breeds rumor. They are right. Rumors swelled like winter river. Someone, months later, drove a truck up the valley and took an angle shot from the ridge. Someone else wrote an angry op-ed about cover-ups. The phrase in the headline, "Bigfoot reveals the dark truth behind 1,000 missing hikers," was a condensation, a clickbait of grief made into a monstrous template. Some believed it, some laughed. Some families called me and asked, did we find their son, their daughter? I would tell them what I could. A description of the gear, a time, a place, general enough not to be useful to someone wanting to hunt. That in itself felt like betrayal to some. "Are you keeping something from us?" one father asked me with the steadiness of a man who had nothing left to lose. I said, I may be, for now. What people rarely understood is this. When you lock something away, an image, a secret, you do it because you are weighing outcomes. You weigh the need for knowledge against the harm that knowledge can cause when wielded carelessly. I have been in the wilderness enough to know that the wild does not hate us the way we fear. It is indifferent in many ways. But it is also a place with a culture of its own, if you can bear to think of animals or other intelligences as having cultures. The way the stones were stacked indicated rituals. The baskets with cloth said someone had tried to bring the domestic into the wild. The stacks of packs said the forest had been doing something for time. Calling it monstrous flattened it into a headline and erased the moral nuance of what we found. In the months after the discovery, I heard 3 knocks in other places, on my porch when there was no one there, on the wood of the base tarp at night, and once on the trunk of my truck while I made a call to dispatch. They were never threatening, always measured, like punctuation. I would go outside and find only a small cairn where none had been before, or a braid of cedar needles tucked into the basket's weave. Once I came home to the porch light, amber cone, and found a small, neat stack of smooth stones on my steps. I put them on the mantel, and I left them there for a week before I finally took them down when Earl came by and frowned. "You gonna keep that?" he asked, and I shrugged because there was no good answer. People started to ask me, softly, if I thought the creature understood the meaning of death, if it mourned, if it had some sense of stewardship. Those questions were the ones that kept me awake at nights. I found myself thinking in domestic metaphors. Did the forest want to keep what it could guard? Did it pick through the flotsam of hikers and curate what seemed cherished? It's a strange kind of empathy to lend intention to a wild thing, but nothing strikes balance like extended contact with the unknown. We are animals of narrative. We press story onto silence to keep the dark at bay. The moral choice came to a head in 2015. By then, I'd left the sheriff's office, and the way the work had eaten at me made retirement seem like a small mercy. I replayed the footage in an empty house when rain rattled the roof and the clock ticked like a metronome. I watched the creature point to a pack that had a patch of a soccer team I recognized. I watched it make a sound that could have been sadness. The thought of uploading that footage, of watching the world speculate and the town fill with people and cameras, it was unbearable. Worse, I thought of families who might see the clip and think they had their loved one returned in some way, only to be disappointed by a lack of human remains. I kept the video private because I couldn't trust what a public might do with it, turn it into hunting grounds, into spectacle, into an excuse to desecrate something that, whatever it was, had been treating the forest with a gesture I could not name. In 2015, a journalist called and asked if I'd be willing to give an interview. She had an editor at a paper that liked to mix curiosity with cynicism. I told her the truth, that I had footage, that it showed something I could not rightly label, and that I had chosen not to release it. She asked why, and I told her, honestly, that I feared the consequences. It's hard to explain that to someone who hasn't seen a park turn into a theater. She sighed into the phone and said, "People will call you a coward, Frank, or a liar, or a hero." I said nothing. She said, finally, "If you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." I did not change my mind. Time changes how people feel about secrets. By 2025, I've been carrying the footage for 2 decades. I have lived with the memory of those packs, with the image of a creature pointing to the bench like a curator showing an exhibit. Tonight, my porch light bleeds amber across the steps, and the refrigerator hums in its patient way. I keep the drive under a sock drawer, and sometimes, in the very small hours, I take it out and watch a single minute before remembering why I made that choice. The 3 knocks visit now and then, always soft as an old clock. I've told the families, slowly and softly, as much as I can without inviting someone to go after it. Some have accepted what I told them, some still curse the county's lack of transparency. I do not regret the family that asked to see their brother's pack and found instead a folded liner and a note. Someone had left a scrap of paper with a name on it, an intimate thing that was not mine to publish. To say I am haunted would be easy. It is true. But haunted is a word that sounds like a poltergeist story when the truth is more complicated. I feel the weight of stewardship. I feel the grief of families. I feel the moral vertigo of knowing something that might make curious people go into a place and do harm. There is a kind of tenderness in the creature's arrangement of things, if tenderness is the right word. If it is not tenderness, then at least it was careful. For all the big talk, the thing did not display malice in the way we would write malice. It displayed pattern. People will ask me if there are 1,000 missing hikers, as that headline shouted. I can tell you I'm not certain of any tidy arithmetic. I will tell you that I have watched stacks of gear arranged in ways that suggest a collecting habit that is long-term. I will tell you that some of the missing were found in time, some were not. I will tell you I will not release the film publicly because I fear what it would bring to that mountain, and that my fear is not cowardice, but a kind of moral calculation. Some truths can be weapons, and some truths are better kept from people who will use them thoughtlessly. I have avoided sensational language here because I have watched what sensational language does. I have also tried to follow my own profession's rules: document, log, and respect. But there is another code that taught me to respect a place and the beings, human and otherwise, who live there. That code asks one to consider cost, not only knowledge. It asks one to weigh whether revealing will heal or wound more, whether exposure will invite help or spectacle. I chose to err on the side of precaution. I chose to keep a recording on a hard drive beneath a sock drawer, and to let the families have their items and their questions, and to let the forest keep its curio shelf. Sometimes, at night, I think about the creature's hand full of mud and its slow, deliberate tap on the bench. 3 knocks, 3 notes like a lock. There are mornings when I wake and find a little stack of stones on the step again, and I think maybe the mountain keeps answering in its own grammar. I am old enough now that my body remembers the cold better than my mind. I go out sometimes and leave a small cup of coffee on the bench, not because I expect thanks, but because some small courtesy seems right. The coffee cools, the porch light paints the cone, the refrigerator hums on, the wall clock keeps its honest time. You asked for a shocking tale in the title? The shock is not in gore or in confessions of violence. The shocking thing, to me, has always been the quietness of it. A collection of packs, the absence of human bodies, the deliberateness of a presence that curated rather than destroyed. The darker truth I've come to live with is that there are things in this world that will not be ours to explain, and that our responsibility is sometimes to protect rather than to expose. That's my confession, plain and heavy as river mud. And tonight, as the house settles and the porch light throws its amber cone, I hear it again. 3 taps, not at the door this time, but on the railing where I sit and type into this recorder. Slow, deliberate, like someone reminding me that the story is not yet done. I sit very still and listen. I sit very still and listen. The 3 taps hang in the spaces between the porch light and the dark. I do not call out. The house holds its small noises, pipes, the refrigerator, the wall clock, and the taps come again, patient, deliberate, as if someone outside has all the time in the world. I move with the careful slowness of old knees. My feet find the top step by memory, the flaking paint, the coolness where the shadow from the railing falls. The cup of coffee on the bench is a dark coin, cooling beneath a skin of quiet steam. I do not expect anything, and yet I am not surprised to see something new. On the bench, close to where the thing's hand once rested in the film, a small stack of stones has been added. 2 are the flat, ordinary river stones I know by sight. Between them, a third, smaller stone, darker and warm from the day's sun. Beside the stones lies a folded scrap of paper, bound with a thumbnail fold. No envelope, no flourish. I pick it up with the reverence of someone handling evidence, and the awkwardness of someone touching something that is not for him. There is a name on the scrap. It is written in a hand I recognize the way you recognize the edge of a photograph without wanting to look at it too long. Clear, quick strokes, as if the writer meant to leave only an echo. The name is one I have said out loud before in the company of other grieving people, first with softness and then with a steadiness that was almost businesslike, because grief had to be catalogued. I have copies of letters, lists of items returned and items unaccounted for. This scrap does not match any of them. I do the practical thing anyway. I take a photograph with my phone, because that is how we make a record now, and then I fold the scrap back into itself and slide it under the toe of the coffee cup to keep it from blowing away. For a moment I stand there holding the weight of that small arrangement, the bench's familiar grain under my palm, the faint warmth in the darker stone, the coffee cooling, my breath a little too loud. Whatever has been happening at the edge of the yard has a decorum to it. It leaves things tidy. The impulse to watch the drive flares up like a remembered cigarette. I have not looked at the full thing in months, and yet I live with that single minute in my head, the way a widow might live with a phrase her husband used to say. I tell myself, not for the first time, that I will not be lured into sensationalism, that one more viewing will not change the ethics of my choice. And then I go inside and pull the sock drawer all the way out. The drive is exactly where I left it, wrapped in a band of elastic, a scrawl of tape with a date, the little dent on its casing where I knocked it against the inside of a purse the day I decided to keep it. I cradle it as if it were a bird. For a strange second, I think of burying it, of finding a place in the earth that would take it in and not give it back. Then I remember the names of people who have asked me, looking like they wanted to clean a wound with a brass instrument. I am not sure what is more cruel, to hide a thing that might answer a question, or to hand it to the curious and watch the mountain become a theater. I do what I have done before. I slide the drive into the player and let the screen warm. For 60 seconds the house hums around me, and then the first frame appears. The camera is steady. The timestamp from a month earlier blinks false in its certainty. There is the bench. There is a pack leaned against the arm of the bench in a way I now understand as regular, considered, almost respectful. The thing moves through the frame with the same slow deliberation I have described and avoided describing. It touches the pack, turns it so the name on the tag faces the lens. Then it does something I have not seen. A hand reaches into the frame from the left. Not the creature's hand, human, young enough to be careless, old enough to be precise. The fingers fold a small cloth, like the scrap I found on the bench, into a neat square and slip it beneath the stone that held the pack in place. The human hand hesitates, as if listening, and then withdraws. For the 2 breaths the person is visible, the head is turned away. We see the curve of an ear, the brush of hair, a jacket with a smudge of mud at the cuff. The human moves like someone who has been doing this for a long while, quietly, on instinct, as if there are times when repairs must be made and times when silence must be kept. The camera lingers on the bench after the human leaves. The creature taps 3 times on the rail, very softly, as if to say thank you or to mark the moment. The minute ends. I sit back, the air in the kitchen feeling suddenly thinner, as if someone had taken a curtain away from a window. The house does not extend explanation. The scrap of paper on the bench, the new depth in that small hand's movement, the way stone and paper and human courtesy fold into the mountain's grammar, these things add to the ledger of not knowing. What the minute showed was not salvation. It was a complicating detail. A life had been present at the edge of the place in a way that had not been accounted for in the lists. That alone is a small revolution. I think of the families again. I think of the ones who come with open palms and the ones who come with clenched fists. I think of the woman who asked me for the name on the scrap and found only torn paper and a folded liner. How she had pressed the fragment to her face as if scent might conjure a sun. My stewardship feels suddenly more precarious. If there is a living person moving in and out of that liminal work, if they are returning things, arranging stones, leaving names, then there are decisions to make that go beyond whether the drive should be public. There is the question of safety, for that person, for others who might follow a breadcrumb trail, for the families who might feel hope rekindled and decide to go back. I take the drive from the player and wrap it in the same band of elastic and tape it closed, as if it were a letter I did not intend to send. I put it back beneath the sock drawer. It nests there like a small, dark thing that knows its address. The porch light has shrunk to a thinner cone. Midnight has a way of sharpening small details. From the steps, beyond the reach of the light, I think I hear something like a footfall, then another. Nothing heavy, no boots, but the soft whisper against leaf. The mountain answers in its own grammar, as I told you earlier. A stack of stones on the step, a repair to the record, a small courtesy returned. Perhaps the human in the clip is one of the families, perhaps a volunteer, perhaps someone else entirely. It is not for me to invent stories where there are only careful facts. I close the door with the slow method of someone trying not to startle a sleeping thing. Inside, I light the lamp by my chair and sit with the knowledge the minute offered me. There is, beneath the relief that maybe some are not gone, a new worry that the presence at the edge is not public knowledge. If the person who left the scrap acts in secret, what will happen when others begin to look? The mountain has always held its own policies of care. People do not. People build campfires and set up cameras and leave traces that the mountain will answer in ways they do not intend. I heat another cup of coffee and find, for the oddest reason, that I am suddenly grateful for the refrigerator's hum. The house is a small machine that keeps its rhythms, and that steadiness is a rudimentary kind of mercy. Outside, somewhere near where the trees begin to climb, some creature or person stacks stones and tucks away scraps of paper. Inside, I measure choices in minutes and in the weight of my hands on the sock drawer. I make a list in my head of people I might call, people I might warn, and then I cross the list out, because already the very act of calling would change what is guarded by silence. The sound comes again, 3 soft taps on the railing, closer this time, so close that I can feel them through the wood. They are not malicious. They speak, if anything, of patience. The grammar might be an offering or a demand. It might be a rhythm the mountain uses to remind me that I am not the only keeper of things here. I rise and go to the door. I open it a fraction, enough to see the porch and the dark beyond.
The stones are still in their new arrangement, the coffee skin quivering faintly in the bench's dim. The scrap of paper must be cold now. The ink has set. The night beyond the porch is a wall of black with a smudge of pine-scented air. Far off, the forest breathes. A light flickers on the road for an instant, an approaching vehicle or a flashlight, and then dies. For the first time since the film, I feel the possibility that someone else has come to the place carrying questions and lanterns. I do not know if they mean to help or to take. I do not know whether the mountain's grammar will forgive them. 3 taps again, like a code, like a punctuation. I step out onto the top stair and listen until the sound fades into the hum of the town. Then I go back inside, and with the stubbornness of a man who has held many small responsibilities, I set the lamp to a low light and sit down to write what I can without inviting more hands.
Words are, for me, a way to honor what has happened without becoming the mechanism that calls hunters to the place. I write with the weight of the minutes still in my head and the name on the scrap like a small hot coal. Outside, the world is unchanged, except for the fact that now I have chosen to know one more thing. The decision sits against my ribs. I will sleep soon, though sleep will be thin. When I wake, there will be a morning, and possibly a message on my phone, and possibly a knock at the door that is not 3 meek taps, but a demand. There will be a family who has not given up looking, and a county that wants closure, and a mountain that keeps its collection. For now, I listen to the house and the clock and the night, and the 3 taps visit once more, like the sentence of something not yet finished. I press my palms together on my knees and try to imagine the careful fingers packing a scrap of paper into the stone's hollow, the human hesitation, the creature's ritual tap. I try to imagine how to hold this knowledge without breaking it. The porch light throws its amber cone as if nothing in the world has changed. I sit very still and listen.